The sun was bright over Arlington National Cemetery. The air was quiet, filled only with the sound of boots hitting the marble ground in a steady rhythm. Sergeant Daniel Brooks walked with perfect posture, his face calm, his uniform spotless. Every step he took was measured, practiced, and full of meaning. He was a tomb guard, one of the men trusted to watch over the tomb of the unknown soldier. His duty was sacred. His focus was unshakable. He had promised himself that as long as he wore that uniform, he would honor those who had given everything. A crowd of tourists stood behind the ropes, whispering softly, taking pictures, and watching the silent ceremony. Most of them understood that what they were witnessing wasn't just a performance, it was respect. But among the quiet visitors stood a man who didn't care about that. He was tall, well-dressed, and his watch gleamed in the sunlight. His name was Richard Harlow, a billionaire CEO known for his temper and pride. He wasn't there for respect or reflection. He had come because someone told him it would make a good picture for his company's public image. Richard looked around impatiently. "This is it?" he muttered to his assistant. "A man just walking back and forth? We've been standing here for 10 minutes. His assistant tried to whisper, "Sir, it's a tradition. It's about honoring the soldiers who never came home." But Richard rolled his eyes. Yeah, I've heard that. I just don't see why people make such a big deal about it." The people around him began to give him uncomfortable glances, but he didn't care. He was used to being the most powerful man in any room, and to him, this was just another place where he could say what he wanted. Sergeant Brooks kept marching, never breaking his focus. The guard's sharp movements caught the sunlight every few seconds. Every pivot, every step was exact. It was like watching discipline take human form. Children in the crowd watched in silence, their parents whispering explanations about honor and sacrifice. Richard sighed loudly. "Come on, let's get a closer look," he said suddenly. His assistant froze. "Sir, we can't cross that line," he said quietly, pointing to the clear sign that read, "Do not cross. Guard on duty." But Richard ignored him. He stepped over the rope and began walking toward the guard. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People lifted their phones, recording the scene. The guard stopped mid-step. He turned slowly, his eyes calm and steady as they met Richard's. "Sir," Brooks said in a deep, controlled voice, "please step back behind the line." Richard smirked. "I just want to see what's so special about this," he said, moving closer. "Relax, soldier." The guard didn't move. "Sir, you need to return behind the line," he said again, his voice even but firm. Richard's assistant tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Harlow, please, you're not supposed to. Do you know who I am?" Richard interrupted, raising his voice. "I could buy this whole place if I wanted to." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few veterans in the audience frowned deeply. A man in a wheelchair wearing a military cap whispered, "That's not something you say here." But Richard was too full of himself to notice. "You're standing there like a robot," he said to the guard. "What's the point? You think this makes you some kind of hero?" Brooks didn't answer. His silence made Richard angrier. The guard stood firm, his chin slightly raised, his hand on his rifle. His stillness carried more weight than any words could. Richard's voice rose. "I asked you a question." "Sir," Brooks said quietly, "you are disrespecting the fallen. Please return to your place." The words hit Richard like a challenge. His pride burned. In that instant, without thinking, he did something no one expected. He stepped closer and slapped the guard across the face. The sound echoed through the marble plaza. People gasped. A child began to cry. The assistant covered his mouth in shock. Cameras were already recording, catching every second. Sergeant Brooks didn't flinch. He didn't move his hands or step back. He just stood there, his face calm, his body straight. His expression didn't change. His eyes were still on Richard, but now there was something deeper in them, not anger, not fear, something heavier. In a voice quiet but filled with power, Brooks said, "You just struck a member of the United States Armed Forces on duty." Step back immediately. For the first time, Richard looked uncertain. The authority in Brooks' voice was impossible to ignore. The crowd started to close in slightly, whispering and filming. A woman in the front row called out, "You can't do that." He's a soldier. Richard glanced around, realizing he was being filmed. His face turned red. He tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on. It was just a little tap," he said. But no one laughed with him. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the wind seemed to stop. Then, from a distance, the sound of a car engine grew louder. A black SUV came up the side path, escorted by 2 military vehicles. The door opened, and several men in uniform stepped out. One of them was a high-ranking officer. His medals caught the sunlight as he walked briskly toward the crowd. People began whispering. "That's General Ellis. That's the commander of the old guard." The general stopped in front of Brooks and Richard. His presence filled the space with quiet authority. His voice was low, but every word carried weight. "Who put hands on my soldier?" he asked. No one spoke. Then a few voices from the crowd pointed toward Richard. "He did," someone said. "It's all on video." The general's jaw tightened. He looked directly at Richard. "Is that true?" Richard tried to smile. "General, it was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean anything by it." The general didn't blink. "You think striking a tomb guard is a misunderstanding?" he asked slowly. "Do you have any idea what that man stands for?" Richard opened his mouth but said nothing. His confidence was fading fast. General Ellis turned toward Brooks. "Sergeant, are you all right?" "Yes, sir," Brooks said calmly. "Continuing duty, sir." "Hold your post," the general said quietly. Brooks nodded once and resumed his march, as if nothing had happened. His boots hit the ground with the same steady rhythm, each step echoing across the marble. The silence in the crowd turned into something else: respect. Every person there, even those who didn't understand the ceremony before, now felt the weight of it. The general turned back to Richard. "That man represents every soldier who never made it home," he said. "Every family that never got to say goodbye. He stands here, in rain and snow, every hour of every day, because honor doesn't take breaks. And you," he pointed at Richard's chest, "you walked in here and disrespected that." Richard's lips trembled. "I didn't realize." "That's the problem," the general said quietly. "You've spent your life being served, not serving anyone else." The general looked at the military police standing nearby, then shook his head slightly. "Escort him out. No handcuffs. Let the world see the kind of man who thinks money gives him power over honor." The crowd moved aside as 2 officers guided Richard back toward the path. No one clapped. No one spoke. The only sound was the continued march of Sergeant Brooks, steady and strong. As the black car drove away, the general remained there for a moment, watching his guard. He then saluted quietly before returning to his vehicle. When the SUV left, the crowd stayed. People wiped their eyes. A young boy asked his father, "Dad, why didn't the guard fight back?" The father answered softly, "Because he's stronger than that, son." That's what real strength looks like. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Brooks kept walking. 21 steps, pause, turn, 21 steps again. His movements were smooth, precise, endless. The mark on his face, where the slap had landed, was faint, but it didn't matter. His dignity was untouched, somewhere deep inside. He knew that moment would stay with people longer than any speech could. Because what he showed that day wasn't just discipline. It was the kind of honor that couldn't be bought or broken. And though he didn't look at the crowd, he could feel their respect in the air. They were silent now, truly silent, for the first time since the ceremony began. And in that silence, they finally understood why the guard never spoke, never smiled, never broke formation. He wasn't guarding a tomb. He was guarding the soul of every fallen soldier, and in doing so, he reminded the living what respect really meant. The story of what happened that day at Arlington spread faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, every news channel, social media feed, and talk show was discussing it. The video, recorded by a tourist, showed everything: the rich businessman stepping over the rope, the calm warning from the guard, the slap that echoed in silence, and the steady, unmoving response of Sergeant Daniel Brooks. Within hours, the video had millions of views. People across the country were shocked and moved by the soldiers' calm reaction. The comments were filled with words of support. That guard has more strength in his silence than that man has in his millions, one person wrote. This is what real discipline looks like, said another. Meanwhile, Richard Harlow's life turned upside down. He woke up that morning to hundreds of missed calls. His phone kept buzzing nonstop. His company's name was trending online, and not for good reasons. The headlines were everywhere. Wealthy CEO strikes tomb guard during duty. When he turned on the TV, he saw his own face on every channel. The video played again and again, each time followed by interviews with veterans, historians, and citizens calling his act shameful. Even his board members were horrified. His assistant came into the room, holding a trembling tablet. "Sir," he said softly, "the company board wants to speak with you immediately." Richard tried to stay calm, but the more he saw the reactions, the more he realized what he had done. He replayed the moment in his head, the slap, the silence, the way the guard never even blinked. For the first time, the image of Sergeant Brooks standing tall while he himself lost control burned in his mind. Like a mirror showing him who he really was. At headquarters, the meeting was short. The board chairman spoke firmly. "Richard, the video is everywhere. We've lost major clients. People are calling for boycotts. We can't ignore this." Richard leaned forward, trying to defend himself. "It got blown out of proportion," he said weakly. "I didn't hurt anyone." The chairman sighed. "That's not the point. You disrespected a soldier guarding a symbol of sacrifice. There's no excuse for that. Until this is resolved, you're suspended from your position." The room was silent. Richard felt like the walls were closing in on him. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control. Meanwhile, Sergeant Brooks continued his duty as always. He didn't speak to reporters, didn't post on social media, and didn't seek attention. When someone asked him later why he didn't react or defend himself, he simply said, "My duty is to guard, not to fight." The tomb deserves silence. Those words spread too. They were printed in newspapers, shared in classrooms, and quoted by veterans. Many people who had never visited Arlington before now wanted to go there, just to stand quietly and see the place where the guard had shown such self-control. A few days later, the military invited Brooks to a small ceremony. General Raymond Ellis, the same officer who had stepped in that day, was there. The general looked at him with pride. "Sergeant," he said, "you reminded the nation what discipline and respect look like. You made us proud." Brooks stood straight and said softly, "Sir, I was only doing my job." The general smiled. "That's what makes it special." Back in the city, Richard Harlow couldn't sleep. His name had become a symbol, not of success, but of arrogance. Everywhere he went, people stared. Reporters followed him. Even people who once praised him now avoided him. He shut himself in his house for days, trying to escape the noise. But the silence in his home was worse than the noise outside. He sat in his large office, looking at the expensive paintings on his wall, and realized that none of it meant anything. He had money, but no respect. He had power, but no peace. He remembered the face of the guard again, the stillness, the calm, the complete control. That image wouldn't leave him. For the first time, he understood that true strength wasn't about shouting or showing power. It was about calm, discipline, and respect, things he had never valued before. A week later, Richard made a decision. He called his driver and said, "Take me back to Arlington." When he arrived, he didn't wear a designer suit. He wore a simple dark coat. There were no cameras, no assistants, no reporters. The cemetery was quiet, the air cool. He walked slowly toward the tomb of the unknown soldier. As he got closer, he saw Sergeant Brooks again. The guard was there, marching his steady 21 steps, turning, and marching again. The same rhythm, the same discipline. Richard stopped a few feet away, behind the rope this time. He stood silently. For a long moment, he just watched. Every step the guard took felt heavier now, more meaningful. When the change of guard began, another soldier replaced Brooks, and Brooks finally stepped aside. He walked quietly toward the side path. To Richard's surprise, Brooks noticed him standing there. Their eyes met briefly. Richard took a deep breath and spoke softly. "Sergeant Brooks," he said, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. What I did was wrong. I didn't understand what this place meant. I do now." Brooks stood tall, looking at him for a moment. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "Respect is not about words, sir. It's about understanding." Richard nodded slowly. "I understand now," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a single white rose. He placed it carefully at the edge of the walkway near the tomb. "For them," he whispered. Brooks gave a short nod and returned to his post. No handshake, no smile, just quiet acknowledgement. And that was enough. When Richard walked back to his car, something inside him felt different. The weight he carried for days seemed lighter, replaced by a quiet sense of shame mixed with respect. He didn't tell anyone about the visit. He didn't post about it. He didn't want credit. A few days later, he held a press conference. The reporters filled the room, expecting excuses or a speech written by lawyers. But when he walked to the microphone, his face looked tired, humbled. "I was wrong," he began. "There's no defense for what I did. I disrespected a man who stood for thousands who can no longer stand for themselves. I let pride blind me. I let money make me think I was above others. But that soldier taught me something that no amount of success ever could." He paused, taking a deep breath. "He taught me that honor doesn't need to shout. It stands tall and silent, even when disrespected." I'm sorry to him, to every soldier, and to every family who's lost someone in service. I will spend my time trying to make up for what I did. The room was silent. Reporters didn't shout questions right away. Many were surprised by the sincerity in his voice. When the conference ended, the video went viral again, but this time for a different reason. People said it was the first time they had seen a man of his power speak with genuine humility. True to his word, Richard started working quietly to support veterans' causes. He made large donations but asked not to be credited. He also visited several veterans' homes, not for cameras but to listen. He wanted to learn about sacrifice and service from those who lived it. As for Sergeant Brooks, he continued his duty without change. He didn't seek fame, though his face had become recognizable to millions. When people wrote to him, thanking him for his example, he answered simply, "The tomb belongs to all who served. I just stand guard." Months passed, and one morning, Brooks was on duty again. It was quiet, the sky a soft gray. He began his steady steps when he noticed a man standing near the line, silent, respectful. It was Richard again. He was there alone, no cameras, no bodyguards. He stood quietly with his hands folded. When the guard passed by, Richard gave a small nod of respect. Brooks didn't nod back, but he noticed the sincerity in the man's eyes. It wasn't pride anymore. It was gratitude, maybe even peace. Later that day, as Brooks finished his shift, the general met him briefly. "You've changed more people than you know, Sergeant," the general said. Brooks smiled slightly. "I didn't change anyone, sir. People just remembered what respect looks like." That night, the sky over Arlington was full of stars. The wind moved softly through the trees. The tomb stood silent, its guard steady and strong. And somewhere out there, a man who once thought money meant power finally understood that true power came from quiet honor, from standing firm even when no one else would. The story stayed alive for years, told by teachers, soldiers, and parents. Some said it wasn't just about a slap. It was about what it revealed. That one man's silence could teach an entire nation the meaning of respect. And as the sun rose over the white stones again, the tomb guard walked his path, step by step, unshaken, unchanged, because honor, once earned, never fades.